I would like to demonstrate to you the new implementation, which isn't such a major thing, but it's something we've done to try and help along some of the router complexity. So when you build a component and you have a front end for your component, so you've got site views. Your site views usually are getting its data from a dynamic get, which you link up to the site view. And this dynamic get basically returns a result set, and it's from this result set that we should get information by which we combined with the view name build what is called an search engine friendly URL. Now your search engine friendly URL is basically done with the router. So JCB also builds the router and it sort of guesses what should be these values. So let me compile a component and show you what it guessed and then see how we will need to change it. So our component we're working with here is Sermon Distributor, and so I'm going to compile it and install it to this website. Now as now the router doesn't really work, I'm not going to demonstrate the actual front end. I'm just going to show you the code and let's take it from there. So when you look at your website, you've got your root directory, admin, and then components, and then in here we've got Sermon Distributor, and there's a file called router. So I'm going to open this, and you'll see that it's got a function called build, a class method, as well as a function called parse. And in this function called parse, there is a switch, which basically makes decisions based on the segment's first value. And if that segment's value is, because usually that will be the view name in this first value, so it determines which view are we looking at. Is it preacher? And so we're going through the list. Now by default, without us making any changes, JCB built this for us, all of it. So if we look at preachers, which is a basically a list view, let's open the preacher model. So here's preachers. We can scroll down and we'll see that in its query it's basically has a get items, and here it's got a list query, and it really is just getting all the items from the database with no input from the URL whatsoever. Let's see, yeah, it doesn't do any of that, and then it just gives it back. So it's as simple as that. It does not need a URL value. So that means it most probably will only set this value, and all of this will really be redundant. It won't be used because it's a list view, so there isn't an alias. We're not looking at an individual item, so there isn't an ID. So we could actually remove this here. This code is not doing anything. Now it is also not going to really slow your site down that dramatically. In fact, it's hardly noticeable. It's just that this is default being generated. Whereas if we look at, for example, preachers is the list view, but then there's a view called preacher. We see it here, and it is saying that it needs to get the ID from the sermon table, which is actually an error. So if I open preacher and I look at the list query, then I see that in the list query about here, it is getting an ID from the URL, and it is asking that it should be equal to preacher. So it is the main table is the sermon table, but it's not looking for the sermon ID. It is looking for the preacher value in the sermon table. And that's why JCB fell back onto the table name, and yet it should actually go to the preacher table and see whether that preacher value is equal to this ID. So it is actually making an error here. Now you wrote the code, or you set up the get, so you should understand the logic of what you see in the code here. If you do not, then this is a feature which JCB has, which you possibly won't be able to, make use of. Like we've said many times, JCB is for those who know PHP and can actually write their own components. Now, I know that this is an error because we want to actually get the value, the ID of the preacher is the one we need to check, and it is doing it wrong. This value here should be preacher, not sermon. You can look at the getVar class here at the bottom. Here's the getVar class, and here you can see what it's going to do and how it's going to actually get the values. So you can also use the getVar class, for your own purpose. So at this point, we see at least one of the router case within the parse method. In the case loop, there's at least one router area that needs to be changed. I know by having looked at this before that there's actually more than one. It's also this categories down here. This one should also change. This should also become, actually it should just get a true here. There should be true because this is a category lookup. Now the other place that also needs to change is this one. This should also be series. So this is where the guessing which JCB does dynamically did not match the complexity of our dynamic get. And I'm sure that as time goes on, we might improve its guessing. Okay, we might get better ways of guessing correctly, and within the dynamics of the dynamic get, be able to actually build this case more effectively. But since we have not done that yet, the quickest way for us to resolve this, and which most probably be the most dynamic option, is actually adding a way that you can replace this snippet of code, targeting this specific view. So you'll never need to really know what is the view when you do this, because they are placeholders, and you need only remember where you add your dynamic get. So let me go and illustrate this within the JCB interface. So all I wanted to show you here is that we are actually targeting, with this new dynamic implementation, this little snippet, this little area here. We're not replacing the whole method, because really it is standard. There's not much to do in improving that, and if we do, it will be just improving it for everyone. And the build function really works well. I haven't seen any issues with that. So at the end of the day, it seemed like only the parse method needed a bit of an improvement. So let's go back to the interface, and let me show you where we can make the changes to have the category render correctly, as well as the preacher, this one here, as well as the series. Where was that one? There it is. As well as this one. Basically make the changes so that this will say series, and that this one will say true, and that this preacher would also say preacher. That's basically all we need to do, and then this router will work without any errors. Okay, so here in the interface you have side views. Now the side views, the ones we want to make changes to, is this preacher, the series, and the category. Now I'm going to show this to you a little bit long-winded, but bear with me. It's just to make sure everybody's on the same page. If you open preacher, you would see that it has a dynamic get called sermons preacher ID, and it's a get list query. Okay, so this is the one we want to change. The get, so the dynamic get, as well as speaking about series. The same is true of that. We have this list query get series ID sermons that we also want to change, and so we're not changing it in the view. The idea was that if we change it in the dynamic get, it'll automatically write the correct code to whatever view you added, because we've added some custom scripting, placeholders within the script. So let's take the first one. It's this sermon, where is it? Sermon series. So in custom script, we scroll down to the bottom. There is now a new tab here, option here, add PHP parse method in router. A little bit of explanation there. Click yes, and it will dynamically load what I can consider the most basic implementation of that little snippet. And so you see it looks very familiar. It's got these placeholders, and it has a specific S view placeholder. That's because we're dealing with a site view, and it has to have this S in it to replace it with the site view name. So wherever this is going to be used, this dynamic get, this will be replaced with that specific site view's value. Okay, that's just to give you a heads up about the placeholder, and that's what makes it dynamic, so that you can use it in any site view, and it will automatically write this, because really the display of the page is actually based on the database request, right? Which is built in the URL by the name of the view as well as the ID of the element. And if there are multiple variables being passed to the URL, you can obviously update that and replace multiple values. So here we want to, within this one, the default option here will actually resolve our issue, because remember, these two values were not the same. JCB's dynamic build actually changed this value to sermon instead of leaving it the same, and there is a very good reason for that. Usually this would be the correct response, but in this case, because of complexity, I'm not going to explain, it isn't the correct response, and so we want these two values to be the same, and it is basically the site view's name. So we could just save and close this. The next one we want to do is this sermon preacher, and it was also having the same issue basically. So we're going to do the same kind of just add the custom option to ensure that these two values remain the same. And then the last but not least was this category one. It is also behaving incorrectly, and really it's only because it didn't detect that this is actually a category, and that is primarily because it is using the sermon table to start. Instead, in the sermon table, we have a joint here to category, if you can see there, and so it does load the category, and in the tweak you see that we are actually using this ID, and this is a category ID, so it should actually go look for the category and build the parse method based on the category. And so here we're also going to just add a true to this get var, which tells the get var that method that this is actually a category. This name in effect is actually going to be ignored, because it's going to not be looking for this table's value. It's going to go to the category table and look for the value there. Okay, so this will resolve this issue. We can save and close this one. So now we have done some customization to our routers just by adding those values to the dynamic get. If we compile our component now, it will automatically fall back onto those values. And just install it again, and now let's go look at the code. So we see here that it did exactly what we wanted. It added preacher there, and this is now category is true, and we see the series is series. And so now at least we know that this actual router will behave correctly. Now this is the first step of our improvement to the router. It seems to me that we already have a very workable situation, and this is really going to make it so much better. There was also the idea of adding some custom scripting into the build method, and we will look at that. And I invite you and anyone else to get involved on this on GitHub. Just if you know how to improve this even more, then please get in contact with me and let's work together. This is what we've done so far, but like in all iterative developing concepts, we'll continue improving this to the point where it really serves us well and holds up with the changes also happening in Joomla itself. Okay, well, thanks for watching.